Thank you very much for joining. It's a really very active meeting this morning because we have around 90 people registered, and now I can see that well over half of them already joined, and I guess many more will be joining later this morning. So thank you very much. It's a short meeting. So a couple of introductory words. This is the first public meeting for the public, let's say, of the Business Environment Committee of the American Chamber of Commerce, which I am chairing. And so I would like to thank very much the committee members for all the work that's been done to organize this meeting. And there's been a lot of work because we planned another topic and we had to, of course, change the plans and we had to ask for leniency and flexibility from the speakers. So thank you very much, because of course nobody was planning that the terrible war would come. But of course, today we will discuss business environment in the face of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And it's really terrible. All of us are waking up and going to sleep with the news from Ukraine. It's still, even months on, it's hard to believe this can be happening in the 21st century in Europe. And yet it is happening. And we have now a real war of good against evil, in which we all need to support the good to win. But also we need to make sense of what's happening. And of course, it's really tricky. Nobody expected this. The situation is unprecedented. So I would like to thank very much and congratulate the two excellent speakers who will be speaking to us today for the courage to try to help us make sense of it. So right now what we will have just under an hour of really intensive discussion. So first we will have two excellent presentations by the speakers, Mr. Linas Kojala and Mr. Marius Dubnikovas. And then we will have a discussion based on your questions. So a couple of housekeeping matters, please mute both your microphone and your camera for the participants. Then if you would like to ask a question, please raise the electronic hand, because we have already about 60 participants and counting. And I will try my best to allow you to ask all the questions. By the way, you can also use the chat function for asking your questions. And it's going to be first come, first served, because we just have 1 hour. So probably not all questions we'll be able to accommodate. Another thing I have to mention, we are recording this meeting. So please bear that in mind. And so without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Linas Kojala, Director of the Eastern Europe Study Center. Sorry for the glitch. Linas will give us an overview of the political situation, of what's happening in the world, and then we will move to the economic analysis by Marius. Please, Lina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great privilege to join your community and share some thoughts on these important developments in Ukraine and beyond. I'll now try to turn on my slides to start our presentation. Just a second. There seems to be a bit of an issue with the slides. Just 1 second, sorry about this. Yeah, it should be working now. Hope you can see the slides. So my presentation focuses on 3 aspects: the good, the bad, and the ugly, from the famous movie, because I think that enables to frame today's situation quite well. And I'll start off with a map of Ukraine, just to talk about some of the more important developments over the last month or so. Actually, this map is a very recent one, but it hasn't changed for a while. So those who've been following the events and war effort probably noticed that this map is more or less the same with the one that was present 2 weeks ago, because there were no significant developments on the ground. Of course, people are still dying every day. The fighting takes place in various parts of Ukraine, but there were no significant changes in terms of territories. We still see three main vectors of attack. The one is aimed at the capital city of Kiev, and Ukrainians seem to be defending it pretty well. Actually, we've heard information that Ukrainians are taking back some of the territory that they've lost at the beginning of war around Kiev, which shows that the Ukrainians are not only defending their ground, but are also capable of launching counterattacks, which is really important because it seems that Russians are at least partly trying to fortify their positions in some of the occupied territories. So counterattacks are really necessary to avoid a stalemate for a long period of time. And it also shows that Ukrainian military is seemingly capable still of conducting attacks, which is a good sign, because one of the pieces of information that we don't have today is basically the losses of the Ukrainian military. We have quite a lot of statistics coming on the losses of the Russians, both in terms of equipment and soldiers, but not about the Ukrainians. So we tend to rely on what happens in terms of a broader military effort to try to analyze what's the state of the Ukrainian military. So Kiev is one. The second is on the eastern part of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Seemingly Russians are more successful there, and they've managed to move further in the last couple of days, even though they have not yet occupied fully the territories of Donetsk and Luhansk in terms of their administrational boundaries, which was seemingly one of the goals of the Russian military. And it shows that they struggle quite a bit. But there is a big risk of Ukrainian troops which are defending that territory being encircled. So this is one of the biggest risks probably that the Ukrainian military faces at the moment, because the third vector coming from the southern part of Ukraine, from Crimea, which was previously annexed, is again seemingly a bit more effective from the Russian point of view, even though Odessa doesn't seem to be the primary target at the moment. They were preparing for an attack on this important port city, but as they haven't managed to take over Mykolaiv, which is close by, Odessa seems to be out of reach for the Russian military, at least at this point. And I think that makes Moldova a bit less anxious, because obviously if Russians manage to take these territories, of course, there was always a discussion whether they would not try to spill over into the neighboring Moldova, as they have troops there already in Transnistria. So this is broadly the map of the war, but unfortunately we cannot be 100% sure it's accurate, because there is still this fog of war aspect that has to be taken into account. So we should not be overly optimistic, but also not overly pessimistic in terms of the developments. This is going to be a long war, no matter what efforts take place on a political level. So some aspects which could be regarded as good. There are not too many good aspects in a war, but there are some, and I would like to emphasize a couple of these. First of all, as I've mentioned before, Ukrainian military holds its ground. I think that's a great achievement because Ukrainian government is still in place. Kiev is well protected, and the fact that Russians haven't managed to achieve their goals in the first couple of days is already a good sign. Second, the Western reaction has been unprecedented. I think we've seen that yesterday as well. We had a NATO summit, G7 summit, as well as EU Council meeting all three at the same day and the same place, which was a signal of unity. And I know that this may sound trivial. I mean, the unity, all those handshakes and photo ops for political leaders. But I think it's important because Russia's goal always is to try to divide and conquer in a way, and to divide mostly European countries by focusing on certain aspects of interest for separate countries and trying to have a less unified European position. But it hadn't managed to achieve it, and I think my colleague will focus more on sanctions and economic impact. But the fact that the sanctions have been imposed and they are far-reaching is not a given. It's certainly not a given even in a war. So I think the West has been more united than before, and this opens a good window of opportunity. Ukraine finally has an EU membership perspective. You well know that in 2014, Ukraine signed this so-called association agreement with the EU, which guidelines the reform effort of the country. But EU leaders clearly stated to the Ukrainians that, well, this is a good document that is mutually beneficial, but you should not expect it to be a pathway to the membership of the European Union, which is different from what we had. We, meaning the Baltic states, we've signed the same association agreement, or rather similar in terms of the concept of the document, in 1995, and we've joined the EU in 2004 because there was a clear pathway from the association agreement to the membership in the EU. Ukrainians didn't have that, but they have it now, and I think it's a very realistic perspective of seeing Ukraine joining the EU as soon as we have some sort of stability in Ukraine, and as obviously as Ukrainian political leadership maintains it as one of the strategic goals. Authoritarian regimes seem more powerful on the outside than they are on the inside. I think previously, there were a lot of even Western experts saying, look, Putin is decisive, he is determined, he makes important decisions much more easily than democratic countries do. But this is just another example of, regimes such as the Russian one seeming very effective, seeming very, willing to invest in things like military and etc., but failing as soon as they face certain challenge or at least an attempt to stop their effort. So there's always a risk for Putin of collapsing and destroying the whole system that he created, because there is no way of ensuring that it's sustained if the leader leaves or if he loses his influence among certain groups of the elite. So it's not as powerful as it might have seemed. And the last thing, it's a Churchillian quote: never let a good crisis go to waste. I think one of the best things that can be used as an example in this case is obviously the EU's dependence on energy from Russia. I hope that we will be on a path dependence in getting rid of it. And of course, currently the political climate is very positive for structural change. But for that, you also need institutional decisions and a clear pathway in order not to be distracted in a couple of months' time, because it's going to be costly. So we should not waste this. It's not a crisis, of course, but a war, it go to waste because it's for our benefit and for Ukrainian benefit in the long term as well. Some of the examples of this good aspect, Finland and people in Finland are much more pro-NATO than before. Actually, 2/3 of people in Finland say that they would like to join NATO. I think it's also an example of a big shift in mentality of certain countries around Russia. That's more or less the same in Finland. This opinion poll on the top right corner is from the early stages of war. We don't have any newer polling, but it seems that both countries, Sweden and Finland, are seriously considering applying for NATO membership, or at least strengthening their already wide and broad links with the alliance. Sanctions, which were imposed not only by the EU or the US, the usual suspects, but also by Switzerland, which is a big accomplishment in a way of showing this Western unity. And I'll not spend much time discussing the change of German foreign policy, which is significant, and this is going to be a game changer for at least a couple of decades, it seems. We're also happy to see that NATO reacted. We've had this decision taken yesterday to deploy additional battle groups to countries on the eastern flank, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. They've joined troops that are already present in the Baltic states and Poland, and this number of troops has increased in all of the countries mentioned. We have around 4,000 troops in Lithuania, which is certainly not a game changer in terms of military perspective, but I think it's only a beginning, and in the nearest future this number will grow, and we'll see that this is not only about deterrence, it's also about practical defensive capabilities in countries neighboring Russia, as well as Belarus, which is an accomplice in Russian military effort. The bad, of course, this was the positive part. The bad part and the ugly part is unfortunately a bit broader, and obviously the fact that Russia still has a lot of combat power is still in place. Of course, it's on paper, and they were failing to implement much of this advantages in practice, but they still have it, and that makes a risk for millions of people in Ukraine and beyond still high. Sanctions fatigue may kick in. Again, I've mentioned that window of opportunity is currently open, but it's not open for a long period of time. It will close. We'll have some dividing lines forming in EU and beyond. So we have to be prepared for that. And I'm not yet sure whether we have a clear definition of when sanctions could be reconsidered. That's a discussion currently taking place in Brussels and beyond, early stages still. But I think we have to have this complicated discussion because it's going to make some of the discussions in the future a bit easier for all of us in the West. Strengthening of defensive capabilities will take a long time. I've mentioned Germany. They had this new idea of having an additional fund of 100 billion euros for defense. But of course, it's not like you go to a shop and buy all the military equipment that you need. It will take time. It will take effort. It will take planning to really change the European defensive scene, and hopefully this momentum will be maintained in order to make a change tangible. Baltic states have to do their homework. We always urge our partners to deploy more troops in the Baltic states. Unfortunately, we are not yet ready to welcome them in terms of infrastructure and all other things that go with that. Hopefully, we will manage to do it. We've seen some important decisions already taken, but it's not only about what the West can do to support us, the West meaning our partners in the West, because we are obviously a part of the West, but also about our homework and willingness to do it, because some of the homework was not previously done. And China's position is ambivalent. I'll not stop there. It's not entirely clear what Chinese think. The propaganda part talks a lot about being supportive to Russia. The practicalities seem to be more complicated, and the latest information says that there were no concrete examples of Chinese supporting the Russians in terms of military equipment or even in terms of economy. But again, probably my colleague will be able to expand on this. This is just an example of how neglected defensive part of Europe was for a long period of time. It talks not only about Europe, this graph, but it talks more about advanced economies. That's the green line, which basically says that since the end of the Cold War, we thought that war is over. We'll not have it, at least in Europe. So this means we can spend our money on social security and other matters. And again, this means that in order to change the trend for a better prepared security policy, we'll have to invest for a long period of time as well. And the ugly part, the last part of my presentation, first, of course, war crimes have been committed. That's the unfortunate part. And Mariupol is unfortunately the worst example of that. It's clear that Russians are not taking care of civilians. They basically target them, and the war of attrition is only starting, seemingly. It may continue for a long period of time, so more people will be at severe risk. Putin's risk tolerance has increased significantly. That's the biggest probably part for political analysts to consider. Previously, we thought that Russia is aggressive but rather rational. It means that they take into account the risks part, and they do not do things that could put them at severe risks in terms of political decisions taken by the West in response to Russian aggressive actions, or in terms of sanctions, or in terms of military being used. That was present even in war in Ukraine in 2014 with Crimea and Donbass, where Russia tried to portray itself only as a mediator or only as observer. But now Putin has increased the risks for everyone, and we are not yet sure what's the new level of risk tolerance is in his mind. So that probably is a bit scary, actually, because the use of weapons of mass destruction are on the table. Chemical, biological, and even nuclear weapons could be employed and could be employed also unintentionally, because we talk about war taking place in Ukraine, but sometimes it's only 10 or 20 kilometers from the border with Poland, which is a NATO member state. So unintentional, unprecise targeting by Russia, which is seemingly already happening on many instances when Russians try to target some buildings or locations in Ukraine, could spill over. And with weapons of mass destruction, the costs are potentially great. Geopolitical position of the Baltics has deteriorated over the last month or so, not only because of war in Ukraine, but also because of Belarus. I've mentioned that before. We have a long border with Belarus, and as Russian troops launched their attack on Kiev from Belarus, and multiple rockets were launched from Belarus on Ukraine, it clearly shows that Belarus at the moment is only an extension of Russian military rather than any sort of independent political entity. We did not have any illusions about it before, but it was clearly shown that's the case. And even though Belarusian troops do not necessarily directly participate in war, at least at the moment, there are no concrete examples of that or signs of that or evidence of that. It's clear that they are a part of Russian aggression. And the global negative impact of war is clear. I'll show just a couple of examples of that. One is related to the region, which is a broader region than only Russia. In terms of the economic impact, and countries such as Kyrgyzstan, such as Moldova, such as Georgia, Armenia, and others highly depend on remittances coming from Russia. So as Russian economy faces struggles, that will bring trouble to multiple other countries, because of the percentage of GDP that depends on remittances from Russia is extremely high in some of the cases. And as these countries are not necessarily most stable countries in the world, of course, that may have a geopolitical impact as well. We've seen already rumors, some information spreading that tensions rise also on the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's not directly related to this particular slide, but again, we are talking about a very volatile situation and a tense situation as well. And the second aspect is just on wheat, on grains, which are being exported from Russia and Ukraine. And as this map clearly shows, some of dependence on food imports from these two countries is extremely high. And as these countries that are dependent on Ukrainian and Russian grain are in North Africa or the Middle East, again, not the most stable countries, but countries that highly depend on bread and similar products, that could spill over also in terms of political uncertainty and political tensions. So we'll see, obviously, how that develops. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Linas. Thank you. This is really concise and clear. Laimon, thanks. I see your hand, but let's listen to the second presentation, and then we'll have the discussion part, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So now the next speaker is Mr. Marius Dubnikovas. Marius doesn't need, I guess he doesn't need introduction, but I will still do it. So Marius is economist, one of leading economists in Lithuania, and business development manager at Compensa Life Insurance Group. Mario, we don't see your video. It's a black screen, so maybe you can fix that. And we do see your presentation. Now much better. Yeah, thank you. Please, the floor is yours.
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes. Unfortunately, it's Lithuanian. But still. So let's proceed. War never changes. And Karl Clausewitz said that that sentence quite a long way ago. So we have a war here, and we have different situations in the economy. But this time we have a good situation in economy. If we look at the photo of economy, which is right now here, so we can see here that the GDP is growing, that we can see that the jobless rate is quite low or extremely low, and this is even a challenge, you know, because lots of countries are needing for additional workers here, and we have a problem with inflation, and we have an additional problem that we have no data. War never changes. And we have no data here. And we will see it here like in 2 months or something like that. What is related with what is happening right now? So US changed its policy, and right now it's increasing the fixed rate. And this fixed rate is being raised by 0.25, but just 2 days ago, it was said that the rate probably will raise like 0.5%. And this means that US citizens will have to pay much more about uh, their the mortgage, and the mortgage will cost much more. What we see in Europe, we do not see that kind of problem. The rate is quite zero, and it stays here. And I think that if we would think about Europe, so we should say that in Europe we will have a rate increase in some 1 year forward. So it will be 2023. And again, about the numbers and the numbers that we can have. Just before the war, Purchasing Manager Index, PMI of US, have risen above 55, 56, some points like that. And it seems like we are quite optimistic. But again, as I said, we do not have the numbers that I would like to have. And after the war, or like now, we do not have the numbers, what the number will be. But Purchasing Manager Index means that the businessmen are very optimistic in the US. And if the businessmen are very optimistic in the US, so this means that the US is buying, the China is producing, and the Germany is producing technology. So this is the sequence that we have. And the sequence said that right now we have an opportunistic way of moving upwards. What is related with the Eurozone? Eurozone PMI, Purchasing Manager Index, means that it raised as well just before the war. So I'm very optimistic that the world is seeing that the Russia is going to go down, and the rest of the world is going to have a good business all over the world. And Europe PMI is also positive. The main reason why we should be a bit aware is inflation. And inflation is about the prices increase, the price increase that we can have in our country, in Lithuania, in US, And I'm looking at the US data because from 9 times after the Second World War, all the crises have started and ended in the US. So what we have here an inflation of US, and US inflation reached 8% of like measured, and it was measured like the biggest one in the last 40 years. So we have a risk here. Speaking about the conflicts and speaking about the wars that we had in the past, I have a table here with S&P 500, how it impacted the S&P 500 with the values of the companies over the last decades. And we see that the biggest impact was of Pearl Harbor, when the US was attacked by Japan. And one day impact was 4% of S&P 500, and total drawdown was 20%. But what is interesting, that it took only 1 year. It seems like just 1 year to get back to where the situation was. And I'm very optimistic about the financial sector. The financial sector is saying that we are going back and we are going to win. So this data shows that we can be very sure that investment world will survive this conflict, no matter how it will be. Another data, just yesterday, US announced that how many people have asked for support without support for unemployment, and it was the lowest point in the last 40 years. So it's very, very interesting. So going forward with my presentation, what I want to show, because in every presentation you have 2, 3 different minds that you can show, and then the rest is all just tellings and so on. So the world is very optimistic about this kind of what is going on here in Ukraine. Ukraine is going to win, and the S&P 500 index is going up even. In this way, we see no crisis here. What is related with the oil? The oil is increasing. It's $120 per Brent, but okay, we are going to pay the price for our liberality. And the main chart that I wanted to show you is VIX. VIX is counted from S&P 500. This VIX is said that it is like the index that shows how often the investors are afraid of the future. But it is said that if it is below 20, this means that the investors are not afraid of nothing. And right now it's 23. I just checked before my presentation and I saw that it was 21 even. And this means that the investors are not afraid of the future. So we have a very calm situation. We have a very calm environment. And let's wait for Russia to go down. So this is it from my side. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario. So now we move to the discussion, and I would like to encourage you once again to raise your hands. We have the first hand raised, and thank you for your patience, Laimonas. So please, Laimonas Kybarka, the first question.
Thank you. Thanks, Vilius. Thanks a lot to Marius and Linas for very good presentations, and especially to Marius for this positive comment, positive note in the end. I have a question for Linas. It's always good to listen to your observations, Linas, and I wanted to ask about the point of which you mentioned, that Baltic states should do their homework to increase security in the region. I have two questions. One, do you think that the Lithuanian government is doing enough currently? And what are your proposals, what it should do more? I think those questions are very important for us, for business, because if we see and feel that there is more security in Lithuania and in the region, we will be more confident to invest. We will be more confident to attract investments, to create jobs in this region and so on. So I think this is very important for business, not only for general population. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just a couple of points. I think Lithuania does quite a lot together with other Baltic states. Let's remember we were the first ones, basically, with other Baltic states to send lethal weapons to Ukraine before the war started. And I think that's also a part of our, defensive posturing. So this should not be neglected. The second, we are in 2% club for a while already, since 2015, 2016. Estonians are already there for a longer period of time, which is great because it enables us to compensate for the underspending prior to the Crimea's annexation and aggression in Donbass. So I think we've done quite a lot. But there are still some homework to do, as you've mentioned. First of all, I think one of our aims for a long period of time was to have permanent stationing of Allied troops in Lithuania. And we have this basically, even though there is no title of permanent with enhanced forward presence mission, which is 1,000, just a bit more than that, troops. But if we wanted more, I think we should have been better prepared already in terms of training areas for troops, in terms of infrastructure to welcome them, because quite often I hear that we could come into Lithuania, meaning the Americans or other troops, but we don't have what to do here in practice. So whether it could have been done before or not, well, I tend to lean towards the former, in terms of that we should have probably done something more in order to be better prepared. There are steps taken at the moment, as you know, investment into infrastructure. 40 million was an addition from the government in this area at the beginning of war. There is now proposals from the ruling party to expand that, to introduce universal conscription, which is really important, to move towards 3% of GDP on defense spending in the next couple of years. So at least I see this kind of urgency. At the beginning, I think I somehow thought that there is lack of urgency to do more than the usual. Because again, this is a window of opportunity, which means that we could do things that are unimaginable in normal circumstances. So for instance, if there is a political leader who says, let's take 1 billion euros from the markets to invest in something really, really important. For instance, buying Patriot anti-air defensive systems. I mean, that's ambitious. That's a bit crazy. And a lot of people would say it's impossible to implement. But is it? Is it impossible at the moment? I think it's quite possible. So this kind of non-incremental movement on the political level, I think, is needed. We see some examples of that, some signals of that, but I think the level of ambition could be even higher.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, and thank you for the answer. Okay, so we don't have more hands right now. It's always nice for the moderator to have a chance to ask a question. So maybe it's a question actually for both, because I think Lina and Mario, you have presented a little bit different picture, because what I saw, Linas, is a bit more sober and a bit more not sober, but more kind of grim picture, and Marius' picture is very optimistic picture. So that's, so maybe you could also both comment. And Marius also said Russia is going down. Maybe you can also develop that. So Russia now is number 11 country in the world by GDP. Okay, so not a huge one, but not a small one. So and it is, it's extremely aggressive. It is now openly clear that is aggressive towards us, towards Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, and their cards are now on the table. So what is going to be the impact on Russia? What I would say in short term, but also in the longer term of this war?
Yeah.
Marius would like to start, yes, and then Linas, please.
I would like to start. I do not think that we are not going to see Russia like today. It's going to be changed, and it's going to be broken. The economy is broken, and the economy is broken like no one in the world have seen that kind of sanctions that attacked the country. So it's we are talking about 5,000 of consequences, or 5,000 of different measures that were applied to Russia, and it is twice less than the North Korea. You can imagine that. So this country is broken. Economically, is broken. It's even impossible to work with that. So I'm a very optimistic about that. What we're going to see? We're going to see a different country in just a few months, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Mario. Even more optimism. Lina, please.
Yeah, we'll probably focus on a bit different aspects, so that probably leads to different conclusions to some extent. But in a sense, what I've tried to say that risks are high at the moment, and in terms of military being used to such extent, and in a sense by a nuclear superpower, that increases risks a lot. Again, sometimes things happen unintentionally, and the spillover effects could be really, really costly for all of us. I'm not saying it's the most plausible scenario. I would say it's the less plausible scenario than some incremental war taking place. Of course, people dying, but at least it's a war between two countries rather than a third world war. But the risks of that are pretty high. The second aspect that I would like to mention is that, the main difference between democracy and autocracy is that there is no peaceful transition of power in autocratic regimes. That's the main weakness of an autocratic political system, which means that Putin will not be the one who just, for instance, resigns and goes to teach at the university and works on his memoir. It's either he's in power or he's out of power with physical ramifications as well, which puts us in a difficult situation trying to predict what he is able to do and willing to do, and what's a red line for him and people around him. Also because we don't know who are the people around him that has his ear. Again, this is not that I'm saying, we are on the brink of nuclear war. That's not the case. I think the risks of that are pretty low. But the level of gray zone at the moment is so high that we cannot leave this as just a theoretical scenario. It's a realistic scenario, and I know that people in NATO are spending a lot of time at the moment, discussing what kind of reaction should be in place if the worst case scenarios are in present.
I can see Bojana raising a hand, but I think it's a very interesting point you mentioned, Lina, and I would like to follow up on that. We hear a lot, and there's a discussion also in the world press, and recently there was an article in Wall Street Journal too. Is it correct to say that yes, the West is united? Yes, the West has applied unprecedented measures economically, but the West is kind of sitting scared of Russian regime going totally crazy and committing a suicide by also destroying the world. Is that what we at? And then is it true then that the West is going to try to look for kind of exits for Putin, preserving him, which is going to mean some kind of allowing him to win some kind of victory out of this aggression?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the West is not scared, but rather anxious. That's the reality, and I think we have to be rational. Some proposals out in the public, I think, are quite irrational. The West is certainly not neutral. The West is supporting Ukraine in spite of Russia's threatening, and I think it's good sometimes for the West to be a bit more ambivalent. We have clear red lines of what the West is not going to do, and they were emphasized quite often over the last couple of months, even prior to the invasion. But I think sometimes being more ambivalent is good, because the other side is also, in a tense situation, and they know their weaknesses, and they know that they are vulnerable, not only because of economy, but also in terms of military. So I think a more positive development in that sense was, recent statements by Biden and other political leaders, saying we will react if the chemical weapon is used, but they were not detailing what kind of reaction that would be. I think it's important, again, to be ambivalent, not saying we will use military or not use military and etc. In terms of victory, I mean, the definitions are important. There could be, and the West will always discuss, an off-ramp for Putin, because there is no attempt to get rid of Putin from the Western perspective. It's either going to happen inside of the Kremlin or not. It's not going to be directly influenced by the West. Of course, this indirect influence from sanctions and etc., but not in terms of, some persons making steps in the Kremlin. So it either happens or not. It depends on people in the Kremlin. But there could be an off-ramp, and it depends on Russia's thinking, on Putin's rather thinking, of what is sufficient to present as a victory. And I've seen, some interesting discussions on the Russian media and those propaganda channels. Some of the people are asking, if we seek to recognize Crimea, a recognition of Crimea as a part of Russian territory, or even if we seek to expand our territories in Donbass, why do we attack Kherson? Why do we go for Kiev? I mean, they will probably struggle a bit in limiting their victory to just parts of eastern Ukraine and maybe southern Ukraine because of the large-scale attack that they started. But as they control the media landscape and the narrative to such extent that they can, present crazy facts to the public and be rather impactful, I think it's not unrealistic to imagine that a limited achievement geopolitically could be presented as a huge victory in Kremlin's propaganda, and that could be an off-ramp for Putin in saying, I've tried to show the world, and now Ukraine is neutral, we control Donbass and maybe parts of southern Ukraine. But that's the last point I have to make. Even if there is an agreement between Ukraine and Russia, between Zelensky and Putin, it has to be implemented in practice. I don't see a way of any sort of concession from Ukrainian side being easily implemented in practice because of what Russia started, which is going to make it a lasting conflict, even if on a more limited scale, probably.
Okay, thank you, Lina, and thank you, Božena, for your patience. So I can see raised hand of Božena Petikonis-Šabanienė, board member of AmCham, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insights. Very helpful indeed. I have a question related to the labor market. As Marius has touched some indicators on labor market for European Union and for US, I would be very interested on your insights and thoughts. How do you see, what are the red flags or what are the opportunities for Lithuania? Because we have people incoming already registering in thousands on our local market. On the other hand, some are leaving Lithuania. So any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Yeah, we had a problem with the labor market, and we will have This means that most of the people are employed and they're not finding the job. So those people that are coming, they are going to find a job here. So it will be an economical expansion for Lithuania with coming of those people. Because we were asking, for example, like a businessman, we're asking to open the borders and to invite the people from the Ukraine, from Belarus, and etc. And right now they are coming. So we will have an expansion, and this is good news for us.
Thank you, Bojana, for question. Thank you, Marius, for the answer. So while we have time and no more questions, I have some more. Marius, this time for you, but maybe also Linas will pitch in because it's not only economical question, it's political too. Will Germany pay in rubles for gas?
No, definitely no. It's impossible, just impossible. And what we're seeing right now, we are getting, we will shut down all the gas and oil, especially oil, from support from Russia, and it's easy. The oil can be shut down just today, and it will be done. What relates to gas, maybe it will take time, but we won't pay in rubles.
Okay, and Lina, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, just briefly, yesterday Olaf Scholz was speaking in a press conference on this, and he basically stated, there are contractual obligations and that the rubles are not usually included in that. So it means that I agree mostly with Marius by referencing it from Scholz.
Okay, thank you. Yes, but talking about, and Marius mentioned about oil, yes, and we have oil refinery in Lithuania, and as I understand technologically, it's not able to process 100% of non-Russian oil, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. It is.
Okay,
it is possible because this oil that comes from Russia is like heavy oil. It's called heavy oil with lots of stuff that is not needed for the oil. And the oil production manufacturer can use the easier oil very easy. So it's possible, no problem.
So you think this is not going to be a big impact for Lithuania to stop using Russian oil? We heard Lithuania is not importing Russian gas anymore already. So this decision of embargo for Lithuania would have, what would be the impact?
I would say that Lithuania is in the best position in Europe because we have LNG terminal that is getting us gas. The Germans does not have any. The Poland has not any. We are importing gas to Finns. It's going by the pipes of the Finns and to Poland as well. So they are like buying the time when the gas ships are coming and they are going to supply us with the gas, and it's going to Finns and Poland and so on, and we are 100% safe here.
Yeah, and Mario, thank you for making this point. And I think it's always good to learn our own lessons. And I remember all those discussions by some really prominent people saying our gas terminal is too big. Now it's probably pretty obvious.
It's too small right now.
It's too small.
It's too small. For example, we can supply Poland like 1/10 of their needs, of their demand. So we can only supply ourselves.
Okay, well, now towards the end, we have more questions in the chat. So Mindaugas was asking, but maybe very briefly, I guess this is for Marius. Just for education purposes, so what is the benefit if some country agrees to pay in rubles for oil or gas?
They are trying to support the ruble course, the ruble exchange with the US dollars, but we have to understand that what we can see in the columns of exchange there is just the number, because local people cannot exchange ruble to US dollars or euros, etc., etc. And this means that they are trying to support the ruble, but it's just the game, nothing else.
So basically, the benefit is that somebody would have to buy rubles for dollars and pay them back to Russia. So this way, Russia gets ruble rate is increased.
But no one is going to do that. I cannot imagine that.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm sorry, but the last question, because we have only 2 minutes. Andrews is asking, how likely is to have a global diesel crisis? I don't know if he meant oil crisis, due to lower supply than demand.
It's about diesel, because if we could imagine what is happening with the oil, Russia is producing like some 6 to 7% of oil to the whole world, and 14% are being produced of diesel to the Europe. And if Russia shuts down, we will have a diesel crisis. So it's impossible to change that supply. And that's why we are seeing the higher prices of the diesel than the gas. So it probably we will have that kind of problem. So if you have a diesel engine in your car, so be prepared.
Okay, good. Thank you for practical. Okay, well, thank you very much, both. Thank you, all the participants, for listening. This was really interesting, and of course, the hour flew, and we would have much more to discuss, but let's save those discussions for later. I have 3 announcements in the last minute. Number one, the Business Environment Committee of the American Chamber of Commerce is organizing another event like this in several months. We will be coming back with an announcement on the green environment. So the Green New World. Of course, this was supposed to be today's theme, but we had to move to the more urgent theme. So please stay. We will keep you posted. Then number 2, we will be sending an inquiry, a very short questionnaire, like 4 questions. It will take you like 4 minutes max. Please do take time to answer. We would like to know better which topics are interesting for you to be covered in events like this, or also Business Environment Committee is working behind closed doors more, raising awareness of the society and the government on various issues relevant for the business. So, and number 3, last but not least, the Business Environment Committee of the AmCham is waiting for new members to join. So if you are interested to be a little bit more active and to join a discussion roughly once a month and bring to the table the question that is important for your business so that it can be raised by AmCham and the Business Environment Committee, please do contact AmCham administration and join the committee. So with that, thank you very much.